How's it going, Eliminators? Today I'm going to show you how to change the belts on a 1964 Yardman Snowbird. So let's get right into it. So we got a 1964 Yardman Snowbird S.263 to work on today. So I've already worked on this machine before. We had an issue where it wouldn't shut off because the kill switch wire ended up getting disconnected. So we fixed that. You can check that video out in the top right corner of your screen right now. And when I worked on it, I noticed that the belts were a little bit frayed and were probably going to need to be replaced. Now I figured he'd be able to use it for the rest of the season. But what ended up happening was we got a heavy snowfall. He was using the machine and he just ended up smoking the belts to the point where they wouldn't work at all and it wouldn't move forward. It wouldn't throw snow. So he ended up calling us back. We brought it back into the shop to do a full belt replacement. Okay, so once you get your back shroud off here, there's a little sticker up here, and that sticker there tells you your belt lengths. So your forward belt here is a part number 40216, and that's a 38-inch belt. And our reverse belt is a 40207, and that's a 45-inch belt, and that's a 4L, but they're both 4L belts, so they're both going to be Kevlar belts. And we ended up ordering two brand new belts. We got a 1/2x38 true blue. Here's your Sten's part number if you want to order it, and we also got a 1/2x45. Again, both Kevlar belts. We ordered those from Sten's. The customer ended up wanting them replaced, so we're going to replace them. And I also printed off a little manual here. So I just went to Google and typed in Snowbird manual, and this is what popped up here. It's a slightly different model, slightly different design, probably a different year. It's a different size as well. But at the end of the day, the basics of it are the same. So if I need any guidance in how to do a certain thing on this old machine, it's always nice to have something to go by. But as far as changing the belts on this, it's pretty easy, guys. Both belts are in the back. You have a reverse belt and you have a forward belt. Now your forward belt is also what runs the auger. So when you put this machine into forward, right here, basically an idler goes in and puts tension on your forward belt. And that transfers power from the engine to the pulley, obviously down the belt to the other pulley, which puts power to the wheel. Now, on these models, you guys can see there's a bar here that goes from the axle all the way up to the front. Now, you might say, well, what is that? Well, that is a chain drive that goes from your axle all the way up to your first stage. Now, that's your first stage. That's your second stage, right? Now your first stage is also connected to your second stage. So if I go in here with my hand and I just spin this, you guys will be able to see our auger here on our first stage spinning ever so slightly. But to change these belts, it's pretty simple. So you're going to come to the back of the machine here, and we're going to come to our first idler pulley right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to undo this nut, and we're going to take the idler pulley right out. And then we're going to go up to the idler pulley up here. We're going to take that nut off. Now, notice the position of where it's at, because you guys are going to be able to move this idler out farther, and the higher up it is, the more tension it puts on your belt. So as this belt, wears down in thickness just a little bit over time, you'll be able to slide this up, and that'll basically take the slack out of your belt. But our customer wanted new belts, and he won't have any issues once we put new belts on it. So like I said, guys, I'm going to remove this nut, pull that out. We're going to remove that, pull that idler pulley out, and then we're going to pull the belts off of this thing. Now, when you get the nut off of the front of this, you're going to notice that there's a sticker on here, and it says keep level. So this basically is just your belt keeper. So this keeps the belt onto the idler pulley. So when you go to put this back on, guys, you just want to make sure that's level, again, as it says keep level. But again, we're going to pull that right off. Now we just had a little spacer fall there. Just be aware, guys, that it does go this way, right? And you guys can see tons of stuff coming off these belts. So definitely time to change. So they may not look like they need changing, but if you saw them before I wiped everything down, there was like all the fur and the fluff and the cloth material coming off of them. No good, guys. So you just want to make sure that you keep that just like that now. So just, be aware of how things went together. And we have a carriage bolt here, and again, this was This was in about that position there, about halfway. So we're gonna remember that. But once we put these on, I'll check the tension and I'll tell you exactly where to put those on. Next up, we're gonna remove this pulley the same way, and then we'll be able to take the carriage bolt out from the back. Again, this is a carriage bolt. But what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna take my carriage bolt, I'm gonna put that in, and then I'm gonna take my keeper, put that on, and then I'm gonna take the nut, just for now, just so I don't lose anything, and we're gonna put that right there, and we're just gonna set that off to the side. Now, this one here, guys, on the top, it doesn't have a carriage bolt behind it. It actually has a 1/2-inch bolt, so I just put a wrench in behind there, and I'm just using a 1/2-inch socket on my rigid gun here to get that off. And the bolt should be just long enough to the point where if you pull this arm slightly forward, you should be able to just slide your pulley out, just like that. Okay, so we got the top part done. Now comes to the bottom part. So we're gonna have to take this bar off because this bar has this piece connected to it and that goes up here, so you can't get the belt off of the top pulley or the bottom pulley because it's got this piece of metal that goes all the way underneath it to keep these belts on. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna be removing this bolt right there. We're gonna be taking that bolt off. Now you guys are gonna have to be careful because this spring right here is connected to this plate. See if I can show you. Right down there. See that? So you guys are going to have to be careful because when we replaced the spring, it took us quite a while to get that spring into position because you don't have a lot of room down there. But we're going to get that bolt off, and then we're going to go over to this side, and we're going to have to get this bolt right there off. Now that one, to get at that one, you guys are going to want to come in here, and with a ratchet and a socket, you guys are going to want to pull this belt forward, and you should be able to get in there. See that? And we're just going to take that bolt off, and then this whole bracket right here, this metal bar goes up to here with your belt keepers. We should be able to take that off, and now we'll have full access at the belts, and we'll be able to just slip them right off, put the new ones on, then we'll get this back on. So the nice thing about having a manual is you get a parts breakdown here. This is an exploded diagram, and even though this is for a different year, slightly different size, the model of machine is the same, and what we're taking off is this right here. That's your belt keeper, right? And that's exactly what we're taking off. So here's your two belts that hold your shroud on, and then we have right here this, and we're going to be taking that off. Again, just like I suspected, I removed the two bolts right there using my rigid gun, and this came loose, so you guys can see it's loose now. If you guys remember earlier, I said that he had broke his forward spring, so that was the forward a reverse spring, I believe. That's what gives you tension against your drive. So when you're adjusting the position, right, that's what keeps tension against it, and that was broken, so we had to replace it. So what happened was the spring broke and he couldn't get his machine into forward or reverse anymore. It was kind of just in a neutral position. Now when we looked up the original part number, they were unfortunately discontinued, so you couldn't get that part anymore. So what we ended up doing was we went down to a place that we normally go for springs, and we gave them the length, the number of coils, just from a picture that we got from a manual, and we ended up coming up with this part number right here. So the part number you guys are going to want to look for is 10-3207, and that correlates to an MTD spring number 732-0153. Now the measurements for this spring are 9 inches length with a 4 3/4 inch coil. The coil diameter is 3/4 and the thickness is 7/16. If you need a return spring on this, you can get this spring, so that's your newer part number. Again, the old part number is discontinued now, so you're going to have to go with this newer one right here. And that's just an MTD spring, so in the States you can probably pick that up for like $5. Here in Canada I think it was like $8, and we ended up replacing that, and the guy was happy because, you know, you can't find the original spring for this machine. And yeah, I mean, you know, you got to take this off, you got to hook the spring in, and then you got to lift it up, and then once that spring is in, then you bring this whole piece down and then line up your bolts. But it can be tricky because, again, as soon as you remove this bolt from this side, the spring tension pulls up, and then, you know, once you release that side, the whole thing is out of position now. So when I have to go to put those bolts back in, I'm going to have to pull down on that and then simultaneously put the bolt in. This bar up here, you guys can see, comes far enough forward now where I can just take this belt off. And again, at the bottom, it comes far enough down to where I can just pull this belt right out. And you guys can see, you know, it's pretty beat up. and it needs to be replaced. Now, some of the spots are going to be a little tight, like you notice here, so it starts to get a little tight. So what I recommend, guys, is just pull your belt to the position where it is here on an angle, and then you can grab your pulley and rotate it, and it pops right out, just like that. So now this belt can be pulled right out, and the new one can be put in the same way. You just want to make sure that you're not, pinching it to the point where it's going to tear. So again, this is kind of oily under here, so what I might end up doing, because whoever changed the oil on this thing probably changed it out of that oil drain plug right there, and what ended up happening, I guarantee it, is the oil ran along the end of the block and got into here. And the reason I can tell you that is because when I took these bolts off that went into that shroud, they got oil all over them, and you guys can see that all this gritty stuff here, that's all belt dressing. So that's like just pieces of the belt as they've worn down over the years. But both of those bolts, as you guys can see, covered in oil. So that means that there's oil underneath the engine, all in behind here. As far as I know, this engine doesn't have an oil leak. So again, I'm assuming that this is just a case of somebody that's changed the oil, and some of the oil has gone back in there, which means the oil probably got to the bottom of here as well. And I don't want to get oil or any of this old residue, right? Like I'm going to wipe off a big clump here, and like this is all old belt debris, but it's got oil on it too, so I don't want to get any of that on the new belt, because my customer might end up running into like a belt slippage issue. So I think what I'm going to do is I might end up removing the spring and removing all of this, but you guys shouldn't have to. I mean, you guys should be able to just pull the belts off the same way I'm doing it. But if you do want to clean it, pop the spring off, you can take this whole thing right off, and you'd be able to get in there and clean everything down. So I think I'm going to wipe it down as best I can, get the other belt off, and then we'll move on to putting the new belts on. So what I did was just take a pair of vice grips, clamp them onto the end of that spring, and then pull them out from that hole at the top there. So you're just going to want to pull straight up, and it'll come right out. And then now I can unhook it from that bottom little hole on that bracket, and then we can just take this entire thing right off. And once you get that spring off, like I said, you just rotate it, pull it straight off. So now we have this, and if we look on the inside of here, we can see belts have been wearing for quite a while. There's all kinds of oil in here too, right? Just nasty stuff, and I don't want any of that getting onto the new belt. And again, now that this is off, you can just pull all of this right off. That's it, and it's completely off. So now I can get in here, check under the pulleys, wipe all that nasty stuff off that's back there, just clean the whole thing so that when I put the new belts on, I know there won't be a slippage issue. So it didn't take that long to get everything off. We got our 45 belt down there. We got our 38 belt up here. You guys can see just chunks are starting to come off it. And over, where was it? Yeah, right here. We got a split happening right there. And then he was burning the belt, melting it right up here. You guys can see. So this belt has just deteriorated over time and just needs to be replaced. So your 38, that one goes on the front, and then your 45, that one goes on the back. So we're going to be putting the 45 on first, then we'll get the 38 on. But again, like I said, I want to get all that cleaned up. Once I get it cleaned up, I'll bring you back. And to get this all cleaned up, I'm going to be using a little bit of spray 9, heavy duty cleaner. All sorts of nasty bits come out of there. You guys can see all the nasty stuff. So now, nice and clean, everything's wiped down. I'm just going to give this a quick wipe down. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I definitely wanted to get all that, oil and all that grit out of there, because I don't want to run into a slipping problem. Okay, now before we go ahead and put our new belts on, I have to show you an important thing here on our pulleys. So on our pulleys, you can see this is for your forward and this is for your reverse. Now your forward, it has a V pulley here. Your reverse does not. You guys can see it's flat, right? So here's a V on the front of that, and then that's flat. Now when I took the 45-inch belt off, it was actually inside out. So the V normally is towards the inside, but on this one, when I took it off, it was towards the outside. So my best guess is that that's how it's supposed to be. Now I can't find anything online for that, but again, my guess is that the flat side goes to the flat side on the pulley, and then if we look where our idler pulley is, up here, our idler pulley is flat as well. Now the reason they run the belt inside out, again, because I was saying that this is a flat pulley here and this is a V pulley, is because even though that this is flat right here, the engine pulley up here, once it engages with this, right, because your arm's coming in, this pulley up here is a V. See that? So the belt goes in there. So to have the V to the outside allows it to go in here, and I'll show you guys that after, once I get the belt hooked up. I've just taken the pulleys here and I've just cleaned them up a little bit, wiped them down, got all the nasty bits out, so it looks like this now instead of, you know, packed full of crud like that, right? Because I don't want any of that coming out. So I'm going to clean that one up, and like I said, I'll wrap this belt around, I'll get this pulley hooked up, and I'll put the nut on just to get everything snug. Again, we're not going to be adjusting the tension of the belts just yet. I just want to get everything hooked up first. Okay, so it's going to look a little something like this. Not exactly, but a little something like it. Again, like I said, your 45-inch belt, the one that goes towards the back, that one's going to be inside out. And then your 38, or your forward drive, which is your front one, that one's going to be the normal way with the V towards the inside. So just remember that, guys. Okay, so now I have the forward belt on. So again, you guys are going to want to route it just the way I have it here. Now, if you want to know how this system works, basically you have your engine pulley up here, and then you have your pulley down here, and you have a forward, a neutral, and a reverse position. When we put this into forward to the front, you guys can see that this arm right here moves to the right. This arm is connected to an arm that comes out here, which then goes to your idler pulley here. So when we put that into the forward position and this arm comes out, this idler pulley puts tension on our forward belt. And once the tension from this idler pulley is put onto this belt, it transfers power from your engine pulley down to this pulley here at the front. And that's how your forward works. Now when you shift this into neutral, it puts your arm into a middle position where both belts are not under tension, so that your engine can spin freely, right? Because this pulley up here is always spinning because that's connected to the crankshaft, and your machine won't go anywhere. Now when you go to put this thing into reverse and you pull back on it, you can see the arm here goes over to the left. That idler pulley up at the top then puts tension, and obviously there's no tension on any of these belts because this idler pulley is all the way down on the slot. So imagine if this was up higher, you know, you won't have slack there. But once this arm moves to the left, this idler pulley here puts tension on that belt. So now you have force being applied to the reverse belt, and then again that drives that and transfers power down to your second pulley in behind there. That's the flat one back there that we have the belt inside out. And again, because the V is to the outside, our flat part is here going around. We have the V to the outside up here. Sorry for all the linkages in the way, but again, you have your flat side to the pulley, right? The V is to the outside, and then because the V is to the outside, it goes into the V pulley here on our crankshaft. And that's how this system works. It's pretty straightforward. So now that we have that hooked up and in the right position, what I'm going to do now is move on to getting this back on. That's our belt keeper, and I'm going to have to hook up the spring first. So let me go ahead and do that. It's pretty simple, but you know, if you don't take that off, it can be a little tricky. What you're going to want to do is put the little hook, and what I mean by hook is this little bracket where the hole goes. You're going to want to put that in behind the belt over here, and then come over to this side and do the same thing. Make sure that your belts are flat, and then put it in there. Make sure that you're on top up here, just hanging so everything's loose. So now you don't have any belts being pinched, because when I went to put this on, you know, this belt here was in behind that, so I just had to push it up, wrap it around, and then get it into the position that it is now. So now that it's there, what we can do is go ahead and take our bolt and put it into this side over here. That'll just keep that side from being in the correct position, so it won't be up high, left or right. You know, it'll kind of align us. We'll use that as an alignment tool so that we can hook up our spring over here. Now, the spring is the tricky bit but if you have a pair of vice grips, you should be fine. So what we're going to do is, once we get this on, because the spring has to go on the outside of this little bracket there. So it's going to go down, if you guys can see this, and it's got to go into that little hole there. But unfortunately, if you put it in this way and you bring this down, this is going the opposite way, and we need this little hook here to hook into there, which means this is going to the right. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down just like this, and then we're going to hook this in, if we can, like this. So we're going to go in, right, so our spring is kind of like at an angle like this, and we're going to go in and we're going to hook it just like that, so that it's hooked in from the outside. So now we're going to leave this spring just for now, and we're going to get our bolts in, and then once this bracket is in the right position, then I'll be able to take our vice grips, clamp it up here like this, and then we're going to pull at an angle, and then we're going to hook it in and then let it go, and it should drop in the right way. Now, when we originally had to replace this spring because it was broken, we never ended up taking this bracket off, so we had, like I said, a heck of a time getting in there and fishing out all the little broken bits of spring. But I think that it is easier to take that bracket off just by taking those two bolts out, which I am going to clean up because they're covered in oil, and I don't want, you know, there to be oil all over them. So I think I'm just going to wipe them down. Let me get these bolts into position. I'll get that spring hooked back up onto the top, and then once that's done, we can go ahead and put some tension on our belts and adjust our idler pulleys to the proper tension, and I'll show you that, and we'll do step by step as the manual says, which is using the sticker over here that's got some lettering on it. And basically there's like one that's on an angle, that's A, and then there's another one B. Basically what you want to do is line up this plate with those lines, so you can see just like that, right? So when this is in a certain position, you want it to line up with A, and then when this is in a certain position, you want it to line up with B. So I think it's like forward, and then when it's in reverse, and then neutral I think is in between. And then on top of that there's the letter C, and then you want that to be level when it's in a certain position, which I think is neutral. So we'll get to all of that in a minute. Let me just get all this back together. Okay, so I got the bracket at the bottom hooked up with our bolts. To hook up this spring, just to make it a little bit easier, you want this arm all the way to the right side, because that correlates to this spot here where your spring hooks up in the highest position, right? Because if we go over to the left with this, you guys can see it brings the spring down. So by moving this to the right as far as you can go, by having that as far forward as you can go in the forward position, it just brings your spring up a little higher so that there's not as much tension when you go to lift it up to put it into that top hole there. So again, now that we got our spring hooked up, everything's the way it should be. When we go into forward position, you guys can see it puts the arm to the right, which then applies pressure to that forward idler pulley. And then when we're in neutral, you want it to stay in neutral, right? So that's in the middle position. And then when you go into reverse, this model, when you want it to go in reverse, you have to pull it and hold it, so it doesn't stay in reverse. So basically when you're walking backwards, you just pull on the stick towards you as you're walking backwards, and it puts tension towards that drive belt there on the reverse belt, which is the one at the back. So again, forward, neutral, holds itself there, and then when you want it to go in reverse, you pull and hold, and that'll put you into reverse gear. And then it snaps back into neutral as it should. So now we have to adjust the tension on these belts, because if you have too much tension on your belt, you're going to fire this thing up and it's going to start running and it's going to start driving away from you, depending on which belt is too tight. So if your forward belt is too tight, you're going to obviously start going forward, and your auger runs off of your forward belt, because you have to remember that when your forward belt is engaged, the tires spin, and when the tires are spinning, again, I told you, it runs to the chain to the front auger. The front auger is connected to the second stage, so as soon as you start going forward, your augers are turning. So now what we can do is go ahead and I'll read the manual and I'll show you step by step how to adjust the tensions on all of these belts. And now's a good time to show you that this belt here has to go inside of a keeper. So if you're wondering why the belt was way out here, it's not because that idler was loose, it's because you have a little hook here. So basically we're just going to take this belt, push it in behind. So now it's going to look a little something like that, see? So your belt goes to the inside of that hook there, and then around your idler pulley up top there. So to tension these belts, I got a manual here again, the one that I just printed off of Google. I just typed in Yardman Snowbird manual and this came up, and we have a section here that says belt and idler wheel adjustment or replacement, and it shows you all of the steps that you need to take here. It's got a couple little diagrams to show you. So we can see here that it calls that arm the reverse arm, and with it all the way to the left, it's going to be lined up with the A line on the decal. So when you're in reverse and your reverse arm is all the way to the left, you want that arm to line up with the A decal right there, right? That's your line A. And then when it's in the forward position and your reverse arm is all the way to the right, you want this arm to line up with your B, just like that. So when you're in the reverse position, you want your arm to be lined up with A, and then when you're in the forward position, you want it to be lined up with B. So you guys can see we're way off there, and again, that's because everything's loose. So to adjust your B position when it's in forward, you're going to be adjusting your C, which is your idler pulley down here. So again, we're going to have to put some more tension onto that because I got that backed off all the way as well. So we'll start with that one first. So to adjust our forward position, or the reverse arm lining up with the letter B, what we're going to do is we're going to put this into neutral, because in forward, that's supposed to line up with B, and you guys can see we're way off. And that's because this reverse arm is going so far to the right because our idler pulley here at letter C is all the way to the left. So by moving this idler pulley in, obviously we're going to move this bar back to the left. So what we're going to do is we're going to put our shifter into the neutral position, just like that. So now there shouldn't be any tension on any belts. Then what we're going to do is loosen this off. We're going to move our idler pulley all the way to the right, just until we start to feel just a little bit of tension, and we're going to tighten that back up. Again, making sure that this is level, because again, you don't want to have this, too far down so that the bottom is like really wearing into your belt down here, and you don't want to have it cranked too far up because then the top metal part here would be rubbing against our belt there, and that's no good. This is just going to be a little bit of trial and error, because basically if you put this into neutral position and you slide this all the way to the right, there might be too much tension on this, so that when you're in neutral, your machine tries to lurch forward because it's going to be grabbing at this belt because there's going to be too much tension, right? So just remember that your front belt is your forward and your back belt is your reverse. So again, this is in neutral, and in neutral we don't want tension on any of the belts. So I should be able to, once I adjust this, I should be able to spin this pulley at the bottom here, and it shouldn't grab any of these belts. So we're going to do the forward first, and then we'll get to the reverse. Okay, so we're currently in the neutral position, and I've moved our idler pulley to the right. Obviously that C isn't level just yet, but I'm just kind of getting a feel for it. When I go into forward, there's nice tension on the belt, and it almost lines up with B, but you guys can see that it's a little to the left, which means that our idler pulley here has to go a little to the left, because when I put this into neutral, and again in neutral you're not supposed to have tension on any of the belts, we put that into neutral. If I go down here and try to spin the pulley, watch what happens to the idler. See that? It moves, right? It moves ever so slightly, and we don't want that, right? So what I'm going to have to do is loosen this off, move it over just a little bit, and then tighten it back up, and then I'll check it again. Okay, so we've moved our idler pulley ever so slightly to the left, and now when we're in neutral, I can take this pulley and freewheel it, and it spins. And if this pulley freewheels, I know that pulley is going to freewheel. And freewheeling basically just means it can spin without, having too much tension where it transfers power. So if I turn this one and this one, doesn't move, because that's not going to move unless the engine's running. But basically, if you guys go to try to turn this and it doesn't turn, or it starts turning ever so slowly and this is turning with it, then you know that it's too tight. There's too much tension. So again, I've moved that ever so slightly to the left. So now, when we're in the neutral position, again, there's a nice amount of slack on the belt, and this is your slack right here. And then when we put this gear selector into forward, you guys can see coming to the letter B, we're basically lined up with B. So it's a little bit out farther on the bottom, but I mean that could just be because, the way it is, and we're a little in on the top, But basically, if I move that to the left anymore, we're going to be too far out on the bottom and lined up at the top. So I think we're good where we are. And basically now, when I feel the tension, you guys can see, look at that. That belt in the forward position is nice and tight. So what I'm going to do is leave that for now because it feels good, right? So again, neutral, nice amount of slack, and then forward, nice amount of tension. That's what we want. So now I'm going to put this into neutral. Our forward belt should be adjusted properly. Now, if it's not, we'll know as soon as we fire this thing up. If I fire it up and it starts trying to walk forward, I'm going to stop, I'm going to shut it down right away, and we're going to take this idler pulley and move it ever so slightly to the left. That's it. Just probably maybe 1/8 of an inch. So now that our forward is positioned properly, we're going to move on to our reverse, which is way up here. Again, when it's in reverse, this is supposed to be lined up with the letter A on our sticker here. When you're looking at it, I guess you could say parallel, right? Because you want to be completely in line. You don't want to be off here and then looking. So kind of line yourself up with the sticker, and then you'll get a good idea of where you're supposed to be lined up with your reverse arm here. So it's kind of a weird way to adjust things using like a sticker and lining stuff up. Normally you just go by tension. So they say, okay, you're going to want like I guess maybe like 1 inch of play when it's not engaged, and you're going to want like maybe a 1/4 inch of play when it is engaged, right? That's normally what they do, but on this one they have a sticker. So I guess technically if your machine was really old, like this is a 1964, but if that sticker wasn't there, I'd just have to go by my experience, which would tell me that in neutral both belts have to be loose, and that in forward obviously the front belt here has to be tight, and then in reverse the back belt has to be tight. That's just what my experience would tell me, and I guess if you didn't have that sticker you'd have to just play around with it, but we're playing around with it anyways. We're kind of going little by little until we get it. So again, now I'm gonna go and move that probably into the middle position because it's all the way down right now. But the hard part is I have to hold this into reverse while I'm checking it. So it might be a little difficult, but I should be able to get it done. So I'll bring you back once I have that one adjusted. Okay, so as I'm adjusting this, I'm always thinking, how can I make my work easier? And as I'm pulling back on the reverse gear, the machine was rolling backwards. So what I've done is I've taken some wheel chocks and just chalked the wheels. So now when I pull on this, the machine doesn't pull backwards, which is nice, but because I'm working by myself, I have to put it into neutral and then adjust it from there and then put it into gear. So it's in neutral right now, but when I go and put this into reverse, we can see that we're still inside of the letter A. So we're actually on the letter A there, well, just past it when we're in neutral. So I still have a bit to go up, and then we should get it to right about there. Then it should be good. So I have everything adjusted to the point where I believe it should be good, and we're going to test it by taking this outside. I'm not going to put the shroud on it because I want to be able to see the belts and see if they're tight, if they're loose, if they're smoking, right? Because I don't want to smoke a belt. They're Kevlar belts. They're more expensive than a normal rubber belt, so they should last longer. But basically, adjusting your belts and getting the perfect tension is essential, because if they're slightly too loose, you're going to get a smoking belt, which is, it's going to engage, but it's not going to engage hard enough to the point where it's grabbing. It's going to slip every now and then, and that's going to be an issue, because over time you're going to smoke a belt and you're going to have premature belt failure. You don't want that. Too tight, and again, when you go to start this thing up, it's going to try to take off forward or back, depending on which one is tighter, right? If your forward idler pulley here is too far that way to the right and it's too tight, when you fire this thing up, it's going to try to walk forward on you. So right away, as soon as I fire this thing up, I'll know. I'll be able to come down here and take a look and make sure that everything is good, that the crankshaft pulleys here are spinning freely, and that nothing else is engaging. When it's in neutral, I'll pop it into forward, make sure that it goes into forward, then put it back into neutral, and then pull back on it for the reverse. Make sure the reverse works fine, make sure that it's solid, that it's not slipping, and if it is, I can always tighten it up a little bit, because we have tons of adjustment, right, on both of these. But he also complained of an issue where the second stage wasn't turning. So you guys can see that he's got a little bit of rocks built up, and it's actually really starting to build up there on that one spot, so I'm going to have to get in there with a wire brush or something. But he also has a ton of little tiny rocks and all sorts of, you know, little leaves and stuff and twigs and whatnot. So what he probably did was got into some snow with some rocks, maybe some stuff that the snowplow pushed by onto his driveway, and all those little rocks, you know, they all settle at the bottom there. Those rocks will get in between your auger impeller for your second stage and the auger housing, and it'll bind up. So what I recommend is maybe in springtime when you know, all the snow is melted, or summertime, you pull your snowblower out and you make sure all that's clean. You could take the hose from up above and shoot it down here, and then maybe from the side try to blast as much of that stuff out of there as you can. What I'm going to try to do is scrape down that big lump of stuff, whatever that is. It looks like, you know, kind of like concrete, you know, because it's been mashed in there so, you know, so long. So I'm going to try to bust all of that up, and then once it all settles to the bottom, maybe I might take my air line from up above and try to blast it out from in here, and then blast it out towards the front, because that could have been the issue that he was having, where he says every now and then the second stage impeller would stop moving and he'd hear a little bit of grinding. Well, that's probably why. You got rocks in your second stage.
Okay, so I got this thing running now. Sounds look good. When I put this in the forward, the auger gauge, and we got all sorts of wind coming from there. That's for the drive.
So after trying this thing out in the snow, the auger works awesome. Now the big thing that I wanted to address here was that when this arm, this is what engages your dogs, and I'll get to that after, but basically when this is out, you're in a freewheel position. So there's little dogs, they're little like gears that engage onto the wheel, and the wheel has a gear of its own, and when that is pushed in, both sides are engaged so that you know, when you try to move this thing left or right, it won't freewheel. So when you want to freewheel it, to push that out, so you can spin it left and right, and the wheels are free, and you can move it up and down and forward and back and whatnot. What you get is basically, when you go from neutral, none of the belts were smoking, right? So the engine pulley here, that was spinning, and none of the belts were getting smoked. You guys can see they're still in mint condition. Looks like they've never even been used. And I just did a little bit of snow plowing with this thing. You guys can see we had her working good. She was throwing the snow. So when this is pulled out, you're in a freewheel. And when you put this shifter into the forward position, the forward belt runs your auger. So your first stage and your second stage. Basically, what you want to ensure is that when your auger is engaged in the forward position, that it works fine and that you can, you know, blow some snow with it. And that when you disengage it, you want to make sure your auger stops. If your auger keeps spinning, that means that your first idler pulley here on your first belt, which is this one right here, is too tight. So we have letter C, this one, for our forward, because again, your forward belt runs your auger. So we have that one in the perfect position. So reverse gear also worked. So again, when this was engaged and I pulled back on this, it went backwards. So as far as this part of the video goes, the belt replacement is done. The belts have been replaced. We've used Kevlar belts, again, a 45-inch on the reverse at the back and a 38-inch at the front for your forward, and they're both half-inch belts. We used Kevlar again because Kevlar lasts a lot longer. They don't burn out nearly as quick. They're a little bit more expensive, but our customer wanted them. And Yardman actually recommends to use Kevlar belts on this model specifically, so we went with that anyways. But again, like I said, all the tension is good because everything worked as it should. So these are the dogs that I was talking about right here. So when you push this into position, you guys can see it puts pressure on those dogs and engages them, see, because before they were split like this and now they're in like that. But you guys can see here that when they are engaged, the gear goes in and it grabs, and then when you want to disengage, you give this a pull and it pops them out just like that, see? Pretty simple design. That's how they did it back then. That's how Hondas work for the self-propelled HR 215 lawnmowers. Kind of same principle. They got little dogs in the back, and it looks like everything's good on the right side here. And as far as the left side goes here, we can see that it's disengaged, and when I push this rod in, they do in fact engage. But as far as I can tell, the dogs, the drive, everything working as it should. So that's it for today. If you guys enjoyed the video, think about leaving me a thumbs up. It really helps me out. You can click here to subscribe, and you can click over here to watch one of my previous videos. I upload every single week, so be sure to come on back next week. Check out the channel and what we got new. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.